All right, here again with Nate from NextGen. Nate, thanks again for explaining to the layman what's really going on in the industry. So it seems like it's just hitting the news recently. Latest recall from Ford on their transmission valve body. Pretty much the same transmission GM has. They speculate that there's only 269 vehicles involved.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, those numbers add up.
Yeah, right. 269, but it happens to be 2024, 2025s. You've read through this. You want to give your initial thoughts on it?
Yeah, this is another day of Ford lying to the public, just like every other publicly traded automotive manufacturer, in my opinion. And I'm going to prove it to you guys, in my opinion. So they're talking about how there are 269 vehicles that they are aware of being affected by this. There's an issue with this number, and it's that the way they collect these numbers is basically through observational study. In other words, somebody spoon-fed them the information. For every person that spoon-feeds this information directly to the manufacturer, we have no idea how many there are that do not report this, and they just deal with it or go to the dealer and don't mention it, and they just say, hey, can you just fix this? Events like that outnumber transcribed and accounted for and quantified episodes of this symptom, I would imagine, by not less than 10 to 1, because the vast majority of people are not filing the documentation with Ford that is necessary for them to account for things like this. It is my opinion that they have systems in place, such as their online reporting, Oasis, whatever that system is they're talking about. It's my belief, in my opinion, that systems like that are in place specifically to be able to plausibly deny the quantity of vehicles having these sorts of problems. NHTSA would not be pressuring them to recall several 100,000 vehicles over something that was this rare. It's very obvious that there's a bigger problem here, and they're just not being forthright with the public about it, but that's okay. I don't expect anything less from legacy automotive manufacturers in the United States.
Yeah, they say Ford identified 2 bores within the outer valve body where the diameter and circularity dimensions did not meet engineering specifications. Essentially, you can put the car in reverse, it goes forward instead of going in reverse. Yeah, do you want to explain how that happens?
I can tell you exactly how it happens, because I fixed this problem 4 years ago on the 10-speed Allison, and it's the exact same problem. What happens is this, and I'm going to give Ford some free information here. Unfortunately, they're not paying me. Maybe they should be. This is so painful, because I'm going to tell them on YouTube for free what they're probably paying idiots millions of dollars to still not figure out. The reason you have this problem, Ford, and you better cash app me, okay? You better light my cash app up for this. The reason you're the reason you're having this problem is because the amount of pressure that turns off the solenoid regulator valves, or whatever you call them in your internal documentation, in front of those 6 linear solenoids on the bottom ground-facing portion of the valve body, the pressure that sits on the nose of those valves to turn them off when oil is no longer needed at that clutch pack is way too low. And so the sensitivity to a manufacturing defect, heat deformation, stress relief, or anything else with your material, and these valves that you seem to be getting at garbage Macleon Fog, Google them, is going to continue to screw you, because there's not enough pressure there to turn the valves off at the right time. If you would have not messed with your software, my idea to put small springs in front of them would have worked. Unfortunately, it appears that Ford changed the way that the computer uses those solenoids, so that instead of using 5 volts of reference all the time, enough to push against the spring, some vehicles have variable input voltage to this part of the valve body, meaning that some TCM software cannot open the valves if you do this. If you updated all of them to the version where there is a static amount of input voltage to those solenoids when oil flow to the clutch pack is requisite, you could add lightweight springs in front of these valves, and this problem would never happen again.
When they say something's machined incorrectly, are they talking about, from layman's terms, just the bore that the valves ride in?
So I take it that that's what that means. And if you see the previous video where I explained how every single Ford 10R140 is machined wrong in one of the valve bores, I am not surprised if that's exactly what they're referring to here. But once again, if there was more pressure to turn those valves off, this problem would have never been noticed, and the valve itself would have been able to cycle anyway, and you wouldn't have had any sort of problem with valves hanging up. The issue is that the amount of pressure that reverts these valves when oil flow to the clutch packs they control is no longer needed is so little that if there is even the slightest imperfection, the valve is not going to be able to revert to a closed position. And this is going to result in a bind up condition or a vehicle that's simply unable to move, pinch shifts, clutch tie overs, poor clutch longevity, and random temperature spikes during aggressive shifts. Again, this problem could have been fixed with my idea, but Ford doesn't seem to be interested in fixing the problem. Their only true customer is their shareholders, in my opinion.
They said in this TSB, they talked about how they investigated it. They use machine learning and optimization and create a model, and then they say we're successfully able to identify, which valve bodies were affected. So they're essentially,
that makes sense.
And then they're even outsourcing that to, they say, their supplier. Does that imply that they don't probably build their valve bodies internally, or do we just?
Of course they don't. Oh my God. 99% of the thing comes from other companies. Google Macleon Fog. They are the company that makes most of the Ford valves, unless something changed very recently. I know this because if you go on their website, they show you pictures of the transmission valves that they make. And it's the TCC lockup valve for a 10R80 on there. And they also have 10R140 and early 10L80 latch valves. So not only are they supplying Ford, or at least were for a long period of time, but I believe are now, the same thing goes for General Motors. This is not a proprietary valve body to Ford, it's a proprietary nameplate on the product. The reality is the majority of this product does not come from Ford, it comes from people that are somehow even less capable than they are.
Would it matter if they had more pressure? So let's say they had your valves in it, and I'm not trying to sell your valve body, just, I know that's what people will speculate, but
you don't have to, they sell themselves.
Yeah, if they did have the valves with the O-rings, which essentially kind of create more pressure, less leaking, would that kind of mask this problem as well, even if they had like bad bores? Or is it such a bad bore that even the valves can't fix it?
Well, here's what I'll tell you. So I think the problem here is less the valve machining situation and more the quality of the design. So it's not uncommon for valve bores to not be perfect when you send a reamer through them. Something that we do, because our transmissions are hand built, is we actually cycle the valves by hand and make sure that they can revert under their own pressure or gravity or spring weight, whichever applies to that valve. I'm very confident no one's doing that in the factory. And if they are, they're clearly not doing their job. And so the reason this is an issue is because what they're describing, like I said, is so common in just about every transmission. And this is why hand assembly is so extremely important. And taking additional quality control measures is so important. And somehow our valve bodies don't have this problem, even though we have to start with the same castings, even though we're upgrading, remanufacturing, etc. We're starting with the same input they are. So how is it that we don't have this problem? Well, one, we care. I know that's a very low bar, but I understand Ford has no ability to reach that bar. But what I would also say is that, again, there is so little pressure to the portion of the valve body that shuts these valves off that the chance of them sticking is basically 100% if even anything goes wrong hydraulically. And so if you have an issue with bore integrity or anything else, it's going to be very, very hard for the valve to turn off. The solenoid regulator valves do not need O-rings. That's kind of it's not needed on those for them to be reliable. The number one problem is that they end up getting stuck. And the way that you prevent that, again, with us, we manufacture them on a CNC lathe or a screw machine, which is a Swiss style lathe, which is designed to make sure things are flawlessly straight, laser straight. And I assume that Macleon Fog, despite being terrible at everything they do, is likely doing the exact same thing. The problem is that clearly there's a significant quality or assembly issue with this valve body in addition to the design issue. If more pressure was available to these valves to turn them off, nobody would have noticed this problem. There are many things wrong with this transmission, but this is one of the most significant ones.
I think probably the obvious question of most people is this going to cause more issues? Can this specific issue cause other issues other than you tell the car to go in reverse, it goes forward? Or you're in neutral and it starts to creep forward? Does this affect any other part of the transmission? Like, you're in fifth gear, eighth gear, and it tries to downshift. Is it going to engage two clutches at once? Yeah. How far does the problem go?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So here's what I'll tell you. So, firstly, let me explain why this is even happening. And I know some transmission people who watch this probably know where I'm going with this, but everybody watches this video. So, I'm going to explain for the lowest level of pre existing knowledge on this topic. The Ford 10R80 and 10L80 and 10-speed Allison, everything in this Adams family of transmissions. Um, okay, uses solenoid regulator valves. That's what our publications call them. Maybe they call them something else. Bottom line, they're the valves in front of the solenoids that turn the clutches on and off. There are six of them in most of these transmissions, and seven of them in some of the Ford models, specifically the 10R140s. What these solenoids do is they have a whole bunch of pressure sitting behind the valve, and when they energize, they get a linear piece that travels forward, a steel piece, as the solenoid is energized, that ejects the valve into the open position so that oil flow can now enter the circuit. The circuit for each of these valves leads to a clutch pack, the application circuit for a clutch pack. So whenever this happens, they're turning a clutch pack on or off. Some people said that pressure flow into these clutch packs is controlled by these solenoids. That's not true. They don't know how their own valve body works. Now, they're binary logic hydraulic valves. There's no way to modulate pressure with amperage input into the solenoid. This is why solenoid strategy is a scam, in my opinion, and is used to data mine people. It requires you to connect to Wi-Fi and then use the factory software so they can continue to collect data on what vehicles are failing and what locations the repairs are being performed in. But that's a separate topic of discussion for how Ford mines people's data without their consent or knowledge and doesn't pay them for it. Nonetheless, these valves, when open, send oil flow at whatever pressure is available to that clutch pack based on the other hydraulic functions of the transmission into that clutch pack. And when they're closed, there is no oil flow. Think of it like a door. It's either open or not open. Now, when one of these valves ends up staying open at an inappropriate time, a clutch pack will be turned on that is not supposed to be turned on for whatever the transmission is supposed to be doing. This is what causes the problem where the 10-speed Allison and 10-speed GMs lock up the rear wheels going down the freeway. Somehow, after I told everybody about that, people started making knockoff parts that don't actually fix this problem, but at least claim to. So clearly, people are waiting for me to tell them what the problem is. So that's fine. You can't beat NextGen. So I will tell you that the main problem with these valves is when they get stuck in the open position, not the closed position. The reason this is because the solenoids have a significant amount of force to eject the valve into the open position. The amount of pressure, balance oil, reversion oil, whatever you want to call it, that turns these valves off is extremely low. It is very, very, very low. Ford has a design issue with their valve body where they have vents built into some of these circuits that are larger than the feed orifice for these circuits. The problem with this is if you think about Bernoulli's principle, if you take fluid traveling through a small hole and send it through a bigger hole after the small hole, it's not going to affect any pressure because obviously there's no resistance rational to the fluid's pressure when it exits that smaller hole. And so what happens is you can't accumulate pressure properly in the circuits that put these valves into the closed position. This results in a high risk of the valve getting stuck in the open position at inappropriate times. The computer will see a speed sensor showing that a clutch is synchronous when it should be off when this happens, and this can lead to solenoid stuck on, stuck off, and performance codes, when in reality your problem is a valve getting stuck, and a properly upgraded valve body would have prevented this problem. This is why I invented smoothbore steel valves for this portion of the valve body, so that they would not be likely to get stuck or deflect over time, and it would make sure that they work the same way down the road that they do on day one. Once again, Ford's not going to listen to me because they don't care about their customers. They care about their shareholders, in my opinion.